Hi, mystery writers. Well, I hope you're all staying cool. We're having a big heat wave here, so stay cool. Uh, Today, I want to talk about keeping time in your story because it's really important and it's easy to overlook. Um, as the writer, you set the timeline for your reader. And time is part of your setting, so you need to let the readers know what time it is in your scene. In the same way you ground your reader with where they are, um, with setting details like a room in a house or a desert valley, you need to help them understand the flow of time in your story because it helps them flow through your story. So, um, if there are things like a scene jump or the reader wants to know, is it an hour? Is it 5 minutes? Is it 3 days? Um, so one of the best things you can do for your story is create a timeline, and you can use paper, you can use a digital file. There's software like Aeon Timeline, which integrates with Scrivener. And also you can use Plotter, the plotting tool. You can set up a timeline in Plotter as well. So it's totally customizable and you can see that timeline as you work through the plot of your story. So you, of course, want to know the story events and when they happen, and you probably should include all the story events from the first to the last in that timeline. Some writers add backstory events, and I know historical fiction writers include historical events and especially events that happened beforehand that might influence things that are going on in their story. So it's up to you, but I strongly recommend that you have some kind of timeline for your story because you and your reader will know when an event happens and um, be able to relate to that time in the story. And for the readers, it's actually without thinking about it at all. Um, you can add which characters are present in each story event, and you and your readers will know who had access to that event, and that's especially helpful for mystery writers like us because we want to know who was where, especially with our suspects. Um, for each story event, you can include the time of day and the weather details. Those are all setting, but it really helps your readers understand your story without thinking about it. I think one of the things you need to realize is that when you add those time details, readers don't think about them, but they are aware of them, if you understand that difference. Also, a timeline is going to help you from overlapping events or your character traveling in unrealistic time limits, like getting to Paris from Paris to California in 4 hours or something like that, or whether they're traveling by horse and how long that takes. Um, so just be aware of all those time elements in your story and keep track of them. And that story calendar will help you insert the right markers, time markers in your story with a realistic progression. So there's two ways of telling time in your story. The obvious way is to anchor your reader with time is to announce the day and the time. Some stories, especially crime fiction, use the date and time as chapter headings or subheadings. Um, for instance, Robert Harris starts each chapter of his book Pompeii with the date and the Roman hour. Um, So it's up to you. I do know that a lot of crime fiction stories do have the actual time as the chapter heading. So, also in a narrative, the character can glance at a watch or a clock up on the wall, and this action builds tension when the character is working against a deadline. And this technique works in detective and thriller stories when the protagonist feels the pressure of a clock ticking because they are very aware of the time. And especially in those cases, you really want your reader to be aware of the time um, as well. But establishing time works best with subtle use of time markers that hint at the time without guiding the reader with a clock. So you can also tell time without a clock in your story. Um, your story needs some kind of time markers so the reader understands the passage of time. And without time indications, the readers become confused, stop reading, and turn back to try to establish the time of the current scene. And you don't want them to do that. Anytime your reader stops or has to go back to search for something, um, you don't want that to happen. So, from our side as writers, you can get caught up in the action and dialogue and forget about the time markers. So, a practical way to help readers is to start each scene with some kind of time reference, and then in the middle of the scene, add a second time marker. So, you can use events. Use references to story events, both past and future, to remind readers of the passage of time. Is the train, ship, plane leaving in hours, in days? How close is your sleuth to that deadline? And if you mention an upcoming event will happen in a week, readers will know a week has passed since the earlier scene when the event happens in the story. So that's kind of a subtle way of helping your readers understand time passage in your story. You can also use transitions from one scene to the next. They can be short or long. For example, exactly 28 hours after Mike received the telegram, or the next morning, it can be that simple, or that night. Those are all really short, but they help the reader understand where they are in time. Um, and if there's a long break in time between scenes, a longer passage helps move that story forward and helps your reader stay on track with the time. For the next month, Axel discovered nothing. He filled out papers, caught up on reports, and hated what he thought was time wasting activities. No one called. He followed all the leads. So you can fill in that longer passage of time with just short, quick details about what happened with your main character. And seasons help you tell time as well. Um, Winter, spring, summer, fall, you can ground your reader in time and also provide setting details. Seasonal details like rain, snow, heat, blooming trees, falling leaves, etc. help your reader see and feel your character's surroundings. And sports are seasonal too, so if you're writing um, in the modern day, or even I know in my stories, the Roman games happen at the beginning of the year, and those are time markers. Okay, let's see what else. There's more. Hold on, I check my notes. And then, of course, you can get very detailed with daily activities. Daily activities are subtle time markers, and when a character acts in a natural daily activities, readers instantly understand what time of day it is. So if they're eating breakfast, lunch, or dinner, the reader is immediately clued into the time of day. Or if they're heading to school or work, or if they're going to have an evening cocktail with another character, or if they're out and children are playing after school, or or people later in the day are returning from school or work. And of course, there's getting ready for bed. So, those are daily activities are also ways that you can help your reader understand the passage of time in your story. And then something I mentioned a little earlier, but let's focus on it for a minute, is distance. When your character needs to go from one place to another, uh, characters and readers know how long it takes or how far away that destination is. But readers need to know how your character travels. They want to know whether it's by foot or car or truck or plane or train or rail or horseback or mule cart, whatever it is. How long is it going to take them to get from one place to another? And you need to know that so that you can do those subtle time references. You can also indicate your character's response to travel. Like, are they tired and cranky or invigorated at the journey's end? Michael Connolly, for instance, keeps his characters moving in heavy LA traffic and by car or plane by outlining suburbs and Las Vegas. He keeps the reader aware of the time as the characters move from one place to the other in or out of Los Angeles. Okay, so those are some ways that you can add time passage for your reader. So time inclusion and accuracy and consistency all help your reader stay in the story without feeling lost. And so, just as you ground your characters in the physical setting, when you include time references in each scene, you help your reader understand that time sequence, and they'll be clear about how scenes relate to each other in time progression. I think that's really important. If you have multiple points of view in your story, you want to make sure that the reader's aware of the time for each of the characters who's telling the story and how that relates to time in the overall progression of the story. So make sure that you keep your time references as accurate as possible when they relate to your story events, and make sure your characters move in a realistic time frame. I think that's one of the things also that Michael Connolly does very well when Harry Bosch is stuck in traffic. Um, so you need to be realistic, and you can be, and readers appreciate that. Um, you really don't want your reader wondering how your character got from point A to point B um, in an unrealistic time frame. So you need to know the time frame. So show your reader how your character was delayed or how a flight went smoothly so they have that sense of time flowing. And I think the other important thing to think about with time markers in your story is to be consistent. Use them consistently. It really helps your reader understand time flowing in your story. And so I would suggest including one time marker in every scene, just the same way that you include setting details. Because especially if you skip time markers for several scenes or even chapters, your reader may get lost and do the thing you don't want them to do, stop reading. So, from clock time to seasonal references, time markers ground your reader and keep them in the story. Okay, I hope that helps. I think it's something you can think about, especially when you're doing your later edits after you've written your first draft. You can go back and check that you do have some kind of time marker in each scene just to help your reader. The thing about time markers is that readers don't think about them very much. That's why they can be very short, like at the chapter or scene beginning the next day. That's all they need to understand that much time passed. So you don't have to make a big deal out of it because readers don't make a big deal out of it and they barely think about it except when they're missing. And then it's easy for readers to get lost. So I think that's the important thing you need to understand about including those time markers in your story. Okay, so thank you very much. Be sure to welcome our new members and share where you are in your story writing. I'm very happy to report that I just finished my new modern present day short story um, set in Sonoma County, California, with a modern day um, serious crimes detective in the sheriff's department. So just share where you are, what you're doing, and for those of you who are just starting, tell us where you are with your story. Are you with a story idea? Do you have an outline yet? Have you fleshed out your characters? All those things are really important. All right, thank you for being part of the Mystery Writers Studio, and I will see you next time.